Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be listening to our presentation. My name is Michael Livingston. I'm the Cultural Heritage Specialist at Aleutian Pribilof Islands Association. One day I was working in the library and in walked Holly Guise, who was at that point working on her doctoral dissertation research, I believe at Yale. And it was really fascinating to learn about her research. Our presentation today is Pilgrimages and Oral Histories. In a moment, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Holly. But just to follow up on that story, Holly shared the research that she was doing on oral histories. And I encouraged her to consider flying to one of our villages, Unalaska, to see if she could meet with some of our elders and interview them. And before I knew it, both Holly and her mom were jumping on a plane and flying out to Unalaska. So that was pretty impressive. And I'll let Holly introduce herself, but if I have it correctly, Dr. Holly Guise is working as an assistant professor of history at the University of New Mexico. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the microphone over to you, Holly. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Michael Livingston. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, okay, great. Atira mayurak inipiak runga angalakli mijunga. So my name is Holly Mayurak Guise, and I'm Inupiaq. I was born and raised in Anchorage. My family's from Unalakleet. And I started working on oral histories as an undergrad in the Native American Studies Department at Stanford University, interviewing elders about 1940s Alaska before the passage of the Alaska Equal Rights Bill. So what segregation was like for Native elders. And the project evolved as I went to grad school to looking at the 40s broadly. What does discrimination and Native activism mean during the 1940s for all Native peoples in Alaska? And then I found myself researching at the Aleutian Pribilof Islands Association Heritage Library and connecting with Dr. Michael Livingston, which was really fantastic. He really helped me a lot with setting up interviews. Some of the interviews that will be shown in this short 12-minute video were conducted with help with Dr. Mike Livingston. So the first interview with Larry Sherkassin is actually at the APIA Heritage Library. And then the other two interviews, half of them were conducted at the APIA Heritage Library. I met with General Jake Lestenkoff there as well. And then the other interview with Alice Petrovilli was at her home. So some of the other elders I've interviewed are not featured in this video. The elders featured in this video were elders and their family members who gave consent to be in public kind of spaces and public speeches like this. So I also wanted to say that all of the interview materials have been given back to family members of the people who I've interviewed, in addition to the APIA Heritage Library. So my hope is that this research is a reciprocity and that it gives back to the community and that it is not extractive in terms of just taking stories. It's meant to have stories that are reciprocated and given back to the family members and back to their community. So with that being said, Kimiko, can we please play the 12-minute video?
Well, the first memory I have is being dragged out of my house early in the morning. It was raining in Nikolsky. And we ran to a dry lake bed behind the village, about a quarter of a mile. And we hid there. We had some GIs in Nikolsky at the time that were building an observation post up on a place called High Hill. And we laid there for probably a couple, 3 hours. It was raining. It was wet. And I heard the words Japanese and bomb. And at the time, they didn't make much of an impression on me because I was pretty young. I was 7 years old. And then the soldier came back. He came running back and says, "We can go to our houses and take things we want to take with us. But go where? Where could we go?" And so my dad took us to a ranch that was on the island, and we stayed in the chicken coop that day.
Wow.
With the smells and the animals, and my impression of that period was the dirty windows and the raindrops hitting the windows and the smell of the chickens. And we stayed there until dark and then came back home. And then there was a hill behind our village, probably a half a mile away, and we dug caves in that hill to hide in. We actually dug the dirt out of the hillside, just big enough to hold 2 or 3 people. And I had a brother then, and my dad and myself, and my mother had died about 3 weeks before that. In giving birth to my sister, I believe, she hemorrhaged, and my sister was an infant.
Wow.
She was an infant child. And we stayed in those caves.
With your infant sister.
Yes, I don't know how she did it. I don't know where she got the milk to feed her. I don't know where my aunt got the milk, unless it was condensed milk. But she survived that.
Wow. And your sister's name and your dad's name and brother's name?
Okay, my dad's name is Alex Sherkassin. And my sister's name is Lucy. And my brother has a good old Aleut Russian name. His name's Finnegan.
Finnegan.
Afenogin.
Okay.
He was named after my dad's favorite cousin. Very brilliant man.
During the summer, we arrived at Funner Bay in June of 1942, and while the teachers and the federal agents that were in charge of the Aleuts coming from the Pribilof Islands were amongst the Aleuts that were evacuated also and arrived at Funner Bay, some of them left. And I seem to recall the teachers for St. George found the conditions too horrible.
Wow.
At Funner Bay and departed. So there was really no school occurring. That's my memory now. No school occurring at Funner Bay. That is when my grandfather and my mother decided that they should try to relocate to Juneau. And many of the Aleuts that came from the Pribilofs from Funner Bay, in order to find work, traveled to Juneau because there were labor shortages going on there, because of the war. So we moved to Juneau, and then I went to school there at the public school in Juneau, Alaska. My mother and other ladies that came to Juneau from Funner ended up working as maids at the hotel, and my mother did that at the Baranoff Hotel. Her health during that period was not good, and so she passed away in 1943 when I was still 10 years old. So she's buried there in Juneau.
I'm sorry to hear that. Did your grandpa work in Juneau? Did he have a job?
My grandfather was with us at Juneau. So during the winter of 1942-43, she passed away in March of 1943. During the winter, I went to... Pardon?
From illness?
From pneumonia, and her health was never that great, not that good. But during the summer of 1943, my grandfather decided to move back to Funner Bay to join the rest of the people from the Pribilofs there. So we spent the winter of 43-44 at Funner Bay. And, I cannot remember going to school at Thunder Bay.
Yeah. What would the kids do then? Would they help with chores?
You know, I don't recall. I don't recall exactly. There certainly was no homeschooling, you know, but I don't recall a organized teaching program that was going on at Thunder Bay during those years. My memory of those times were not pleasant, so I've tend to kind of eliminate them and not to remember too much. So my memories of exactly what was going on at Thunder Bay at that time. The living conditions were not very, very good. The food was short, the quarters were cold and not pleasant.
The men had to clean.
Oh, the men, the
Oh
Aleut
yeah,
men.
so where we were, the men cleaned. Yeah, because I know my father and my brother and Uncle Bill, they cleaned the whole. That's what they call it, I guess, the hole where we were.
Wow.
And then after the Pribilovans left, again they cleaned the whole ship. So Attica people were left to clean Delaroff after the Pribilovans left. But you can't blame them, there was not enough water. The poor women with the babies,
Yeah.
you know, had hard. I didn't know this. I mean, learned later from talking to the elders that they really had a hard time with the diapers, trying to wash them while they had the water turned off.
Yeah.
And there was never really enough food to feed all the people. But I was lucky, two of my cousins were cooks from Pribilof, so they cooked and they'd always say piece of bread and fruit for me and my sister.
That's nice.
So it was very nice of them.
How did you feel the day you left when you saw the village burn?
It was like, it was unreal. It wasn't really happening, but it was. It was like, to this day I can just see the village burning, the people, the boats coming to the ship. But I couldn't really believe this could be happening, you know. And I was wondering, will I ever come back? I did not want to leave Attica. I mean, I guess because I was so secure there, I did not want to leave. But we left, and I was taught. My father told me, with God's help, we'll come back. So
Yeah.
we did.
So that's what your dad said, that you would come back with God's help?
Yeah. I was to keep everything in with God's help, we'll be back. Yeah. You know, talk Russian. Could read Aleut. Him and Mr. Ermolov in Seattle, they used to write to each other in Aleut, and my sister burnt the letters.
Oh, why?
She's a neat freak.
Yeah.
She's really a neat freak. You know how some people are, but
Yeah.
without no use, out it goes, you know.
Oh my gosh. So he only spoke Aleut after the war.
Yeah, if he had to, he understood English, okay? He just didn't want to speak it, because he was hurt the way we were treated, like we were nobody. They didn't really treat us fairly, in my mind.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize it had a lot of effect on me until later in years. The hurt, the bitterness that I felt. What started to cure me was when I forgave my husband in 1993. Got involved with the Rural Human Services classes. I was an elder, involved in talking circles.
That's good.
That really heals you, you know.
Yeah. I think it's good to talk.
I did the first time I went, I wouldn't even talk.
Wow. Yeah.
Second time, I did. Then let's talk.
So how often do you remember Kilisnu? Like, do you think about it every
Literally
day?
hardly.
Hardly.
Yeah, I have 2 great-grandsons.
Mm-hmm.
And
Cute.
they occupy my time. I mean, I'm happy. I'm content. There's nothing. It seems like I waited for the peaceful time on earth. I'm very. You can't be happy all the time, but I'm very content with what I have. My daughter owns a duplex. She rents to me. My son drives me around. I go to church every Sunday. And my beautiful grandsons. Let me see if I have a
okay.
picture.
Thank you, Holly. That was really amazing and good to see the elders speaking, and really appreciate you sharing that with us, and really appreciate you speaking in Nupiat. That was beautiful. So I wanted to turn the microphone back over to you.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, I think you'll see from the videos, I'm a very active listener. I feel like it's such an honor to connect with our elders. And I also realize that I'm an inside outsider. Like, I'm Alaska Native, but I'm not Unanga. And so I really extend my heartfelt thanks to you, Dr. Mike Livingston, and also to other people who helped me arrange these interviews, including other Native academics like Maria Williams at UAA, who helped set up the interview with Alice Petrovelli, and also Sherry Hundorf at UC Berkeley, who helped set up the interview with General Jake Lestenkopf. So even as a grad student, I received a lot of support from the Alaska Native community and the academic community. So with that being said, I have launched a website, worldwar2alaska.com, that features oral histories with Native elders, from Unanga internment to the Alaska Territorial Guard, to Native people who were children during the war. So that could be a website worth checking out. So, and I will cede the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Guise, and also thank you for sharing part of your doctoral dissertation with me. I think it was maybe chapter 1 that you shared with me, and what you'd written about Funter Bay was very, very powerful. And I hope that you're able to share that with others. And if I understand correctly, you might be working on changing your dissertation into a book, and sure it'd be exciting to see that published. And maybe while other people are speaking, you can share a link to your the World War II site that you mentioned, so that others can access this. And at this point, I'd like to turn the microphone over to Dr. Rachel Mason from the National Park Service. And Dr. Guise, if you can stick with us, and hopefully we can circle back around to you if people have questions. But I think I first met Dr. Mason when I was a student at the University of Alaska, Anchorage. I think I was taking an anthropology class, maybe cultural anthropology, and have known Dr. Mason over the years for her amazing work with the Lost Villages project, Lost Villages book, and then with the amazing work that Dr. Mason has done to help some of the Attuans return to their island. So I'll turn the microphone over to Dr. Mason.
Thank you, Mike. And I wonder if we could have, okay, great. Thank you so much for the opportunity to participate in the Japanese American Tadaima. I'm going to be talking about some pilgrimages of remembrance and healing that relate to the Unangax experience of World War II. During the war, they were taken from their homes by the US government and relocated to camps in an alien landscape. And I'm going to focus particularly on the residents of one village, Attu, who were taken prisoner by the Japanese and brought to Hokkaido, Japan, where nearly half of them died before the war is over. Next. On the left, you see Periscovia Locanon from Attu with her first baby, Gabriel. And this photo was taken when they were brought to Japan as prisoners. You can see they both have prisoner numbers on them. Baby Gabriel died in Japan, and so did Periscovia's second child, born in Japan. Periscovia never returned to Attu after the war because the US government didn't allow the survivors to return to the village. Instead, she was relocated to Atka, and she eventually had 8 more children. And her oldest child, Helen Ford, who's in the right-hand picture sitting on the couch. She was able to return to Attu in 2017 with some of the other descendants of Attu who were seeing the village for the first time. Next. Attu's at the end of the Aleutian chain, and it's closer to Japan than it is to anywhere in the mainland US. It was very isolated before the war, and it was visited once or twice a year by a Coast Guard revenue cutter bringing supplies and mail, maybe a priest to marry couples or to baptize babies or conduct memorial services, and usually a doctor or dentist for an annual visit to the community. Next. But on June 7th, 1942, the tranquility was shattered when the quiet village was invaded by the Japanese. And you can see the picture of the Japanese putting up the imperial flag. The soldiers interrogated and executed the non-native radio operator, and they told the Attuans they were now under Japanese rule. The Japanese stayed in the village all summer. You can just leave that up for a little bit here. The Japanese stayed in the village all summer, and they allowed normal fishing to continue as long as the Japanese got some fish too, and they befriended some of the children. And you can see here, this is a map of the Attuans' journey. It's probably hard to see on the screen, but the red line is when they went to Japan. In September of 1942, the Japanese told the Attuans to get on a boat to bring all the fish and other food that they had because it might be a permanent relocation. They were taken to the city of Otaru, which is on Hokkaido Island in Japan. Next. And here are some of the young people with their prisoner numbers they were probably taken after they arrived in Japan. Next. And in the summer of 2017, thanks to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, some of the descendants of Attu were able to return to Attu by boat, and they were able to see and to walk and stand in the beloved place that their parents and their grandparents had left behind so many years ago. Next. One of the big losses was their church. And after the Attuans were taken to Japan, the Americans destroyed the village. They bombed it, including the church, because they didn't want the Japanese to be able to use it as a headquarters. But before the war, the church had been the center of community life. There was no resident priest, but the services were conducted by lay readers. Next. And in the next one, you'll see that on the trip to Attu, as we had done with other villages, which I'll be talking about in a little while, the descendants of Attu, with the help of the Tekla crew, that's the boat, the Fish and Wildlife research vessel that the Attu descendants came on, they were able to plant a cross at the site of the former church. And then on the next one, you'll see that the descendants also gathered grass, because before the war, the Attu women were some of the best weavers in the Aleutians, and the grass growing in Attu was the finest. And so on this pilgrimage to Attu, the descendants gathered grass and for delivery to the couple of weavers back in Anchorage who still knew the Attu weaving technique, including Agnes Thompson, who is a descendant of Attu. And just as to point out, the woman in the center on the left is Periscovia Locanon, the same one that we saw the picture of with her baby there. And her daughter Helen is on the picture on the right. She's the woman in the orange coat with the glasses holding grass. And we tried to find exactly the same site, but it probably was a slightly different place. So next. And the Attuans were not the only Native people, the only Unangax taken away from their homes. The other Unangax were removed ostensibly for their own protection after the bombing of Dutch Harbor in Unalaska in 1942. And you heard about it. Those of you who listened to the other panel heard some of the stories of that. And if you could go to the next place, we have the map of all the Aleut relocations. Their Aleuts were told they needed to pack up suitcases, board a boat. None of them knew exactly where they were going. Neither did the government at that point. And so they were delivered to makeshift camps and former canneries spread throughout Southeast Alaska. In the next one, you'll see a picture of Ward Lake. This is where the residents of the smallest villages were taken outside Ketchikan, where they stayed for the duration of the war. And there are cemeteries attached to each of the camps, as you've heard. And after the war, because the wartime experience took a particularly high toll on infants and the elderly. And after the war, the residents of these smallest villages were taken back to the Aleutians, but they weren't allowed to go home. The government thought it would be too difficult to resettle the villages with the few residents who returned. So instead, they were dropped off at other villages. So on the next slide, you'll see, and this Okalina, Patricia Gregory just told us about her family's connections to McCushion in a project that, again, was made possible by the Fish and Wildlife Service vessel Tekla. Some of the surviving residents and their children and grandchildren had a chance to make a pilgrimage to the former home villages, and some of them for the first time in 65 years. And these are pictures from the trip to McCushion in 2009. In front of the cross, you see Starosta Nikolai Lukanov, and you'll see Patty behind him on the left. This is after planting the cross there. Next one. These are pictures from the trip to Kashiga in 2010. Also with a cross planted at the site of the former church. Next, we'll look at Borka in 2010 with planting a cross at the site of the former church. And I'll just go kind of quickly over the next few slides. The next one has to do with a commemoration that was in Dutch Harbor, Unalaska in 2017, commemorating the bombing of Dutch Harbor in Unalaska. Next, Bishop David and Father Ivan led the group in a memory walk commemorating all those who died in the attack and those Unangax who died while relocated to Southeast Alaska during the war. Next. And we were fortunate to be able to gather some of the veterans who were a part of the Aleutian campaign, and also all the Aleut evacuees who were able to come. And you can see on the top picture, I think that's Alice Petrovelli. Maybe not. I think that was, sorry, that isn't her. So we'll go on to the next one. We also had a commemoration in honor of to remember the Battle of Attu. And for that one, it included descendants of the Japanese soldiers who fought on Attu, as well as some of the two surviving Attu residents and some of the surviving American veterans. Next. Here's Elizabeth Golodoff-Kudrin. She's the little girl who was number 30. She is presently one of the two surviving residents of once lived in Attu, and honors were heaped on her and her brother during this commemoration. Next. And here's a picture of Elizabeth and her brother Gregory and the Japanese delegation that came there. And they came to the commemoration with an urgent request for assistance in bringing the remains of the Japanese soldiers that are back, they're still on Attu Island, back to Japan. So theirs was an unusual pilgrimage too. Next. And here are some of the veterans meeting the descendants of Attu. There's Helena, who's going to be speaking after me, with her daughter, who was then an infant, meeting one of the veterans, and another Attu descendant, Helen Ford, who was Parascovia Lucannan's first surviving child. She's meeting a veteran there. Next. Okay, and just to finish up, I made my own pilgrimage to Hokkaido in 2016. I looked for the places in Otaru where the Attuans were held prisoner, and incredibly, the first house they lived in was still standing, and it actually looks in pretty good condition right now. But if you can imagine 41 people housed in this house, which had been a railway dormitory, as well as their guard and his family. Next. And there's even a Russian Orthodox church in Otaru. Well, while they were imprisoned in Japan, the Attuans had no connection. They were cut off with ties from their church, which had been so central to their lives. But nevertheless, their faith sustained them. And near the end of their stay, according to one Attuan's account, they were allowed to wander freely in Otaru, and they met a Russian couple who practiced their faith. And so when I was in Otaru, I was able to find a Russian church. I was moved to see how close it was to the place where the Attuans were held. But there's a Russian Orthodox church with a Japanese congregation, and I was able to visit there. Next. So that's a sketchy description of some of the pilgrimages that are connected with the Unangax experience of World War II. I want to thank the survivors and descendants for sharing their story and allowing me to be part of it. And also want to thank the Fish and Wildlife Service for bringing people on these pilgrimages to Makushin, Kashiga, Borka, and Attu. And finally, to the Aleutian Pribilof Island Association for its longtime support of the Park Service and its programs.
Thank you, Dr. Mason. Really appreciate your presentation and the amazing work you've done over the years to honor the history of what occurred, especially the publications you've been actively involved in. Those have certainly helped get the story out. And so hopefully you can stick around with us, and we'll circle back to you in just a few moments. I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions. So I'll turn the microphone over to Helena. I've known Helena since about the year 2000. We worked together on the Kayaks and Canoe project at the Alaska Native Heritage Center way back in the day, and appreciate some of the amazing work that Helena has done to honor the Attuans. I'll turn the microphone over to you.
Helena Ama, Okatinach, Asak Taku King, Anchorage, hing ang gaginah. Atan ilagan ang gaginah. Sasinah uting. Hi, my name's Helena Ugatina Healer. I live in Anchorage. My ancestors come from Attu, and I am Sasina. So mine is not a presentation. Mine's just kind of off the book, literally. I'm going to read some excerpts from some books. But before that, I will kind of start chronologically. Here's the photo, which that way. These are my sagu, which is great-grandfather, great-grandmother. This is Michael Hudakoff, the last chief of Attu Island, and with his wife, Anisha. Anisha died prior to being a prisoner in Japan. And then this is their son, Georgie. So it was in 1936. So as you guys know, they were captive. I'm going to read a little excerpt from Mike Locannon, who is related, I believe, to Helen Ford. So their languages English wasn't their first language. I'm going to try to read this in the correct form of English. If I mistakenly not correct it, it's because they didn't normally write English. So they spoke Sasinan. So one day we heard Japs bombing Dutch Harbor over the radio. We still hear the war on the radio. One day Attu men's were getting ready for going out to gather driftwood. They got the boats ready and fill up gallons for gasoline. You can tell something is going to happen, but they didn't know what is coming to them. I myself feel something strange is going to happen to us. Some of the other men say when I visited his house that he got some kind of heart trouble. He said maybe too much blood pressure. I asked him what is his trouble. Oh, he said my heart keeps bothering me. I can't go to sleep. My heart is just like it comes up to my throat. If it does that, I feel awful weakened. I asked him if he's going out for wood with other people or the men. He said I don't feel like to go, but anyways, I got to go. I myself don't feel so good, but I didn't pay any attention to this. Once in a while, I can feel my heart thump, just like it choked me, but I don't pay any attention to it. Most everybody looks sad to me. So this is before the Japanese arrived. So they're feeling something bad is going to happen. It's the intuition that's talking to them. That day, the village was so quiet. All I can hear is the gas motors, the power plant, which runs 3 times a day by the schoolhouse. All we can hear is puto, puto, puto. Even the kids don't like to play. It was really nice at that evening. All the way out is clear. The island seems setting on top of the surface out on the ocean. When I look into the mountain, everything is green flower beginning to blossom. Things look awfully nice. When I sniff in the air, I can smell flowers and look into the mountains on each side of the village. It looks clearer than I ever seen before. A little fog strings round-footed mountains looks nice. Hardly little breeze come from the southwest. Most of the houses are smoking. So when I passed some houses, I smelled boiled salmon. So is my house too. My wife, she's boiling salmon for supper. So I'm going to kind of skip ahead to later in the day. So it looks like they're trying to collect wood for their day. I told my wife, and he's married, I told my wife that I have a hunch that Japs will be here sometime, she said to me. I hope they will not kill everyone. Every time when my heart thumps, makes me feel sick and weak. It's about 11 p.m., so I told my wife I'm going to bed now. My wife was still up washing dishes. So on June 7th, 1942, Sunday in the morning early when I was sleeping, someone was knocking at my door. So I got up and looked who it was. Said I'm Fred. Fred Hudakoff is my great uncle. He said, "I'm Fred," with a frightened voice. I was wondering what was the matter, so I asked him what was the matter. He told me there are boats out there, and they are unknown boats, don't have a flag on either. They might be Japs. I asked how many there are. He was half frightened and shaking. He said he doesn't know. It looks like more than 4 or 5. So then he got out and went down to his house, and I went to my bed again. It was 3 a.m. in the morning. It was too early for me to get up anyways. I told her it was Fred, and she started to nurse her baby. I went back to sleep again. I usually get up at 7 a.m. Okay, so I'm going to kind of skip ahead to you. I said to my wife, Fred said Japanese boats outside the harbor. She lifted her head off her pillow, looked at her baby, and said, "Oh, God bless. What will we do then?" I said her, "Nothing. We can do, honey, we can't do anything. God knows what we'll do, and if our time has come, we'll be dead in an hour. So all we can think is God is in our heart. That is all." "Oh," she said, "oh, my dear little baby." She got tears in her eyes as she was spooked. So everybody in the village knew something was going to happen to them. But they still got up to go to church at 8:30 a.m. on that day. Some of them didn't go. Mike Locanon didn't go to church. And when the Japanese arrived, Mike and another fellow villager saw them coming, and they were hiding in the foothills. And they stayed there for pretty much the whole day, and then they finally gave up and arrived with the rest of their family. So that is just trying to help you picture in their own shoes as to what happened, to kind of visualize what happened. And so Rachel had some photos. I have a little poster of some of the prisoners of war. There we go. So they were in Attu for 3 years, but prior to that, they were in contact with Russians as well. So it was, the Attuans survived Russians, Japanese, and American governments. Not a lot of people, it's not something to brag about, survived government, I don't know what you would call it, crimes. Anyways, here's another photo of some survivors. This is Steve Hudakoff and Angeline Hudakoff. Angeline Hudakoff is my grandmother. Steve and Angeline were the last Attuan speakers that spoke our language. Unfortunately, Steve died, so he was the last speaker to pass away, but I am trying to learn that language and hopefully revive that sleeping language. And Tadaima, the word, I have just come back home now, is what it means. I'm really drawn to that word. We have the same pain, like wanting to go home. That's what my heart feels. We all want to go home. And Tadaima's pilgrimages of healing is awesome. And so Tadaima has historic preservation, and they really emphasize inclusion, but our people have always been excluded. In 1986, a titanium ton memorial was put up by the Japanese. I was only 4 years old at that time. The US government allowed the Japanese to do that. They gave notice to the public 4 days in advance. Neither did the Japanese government or the US government ask what the natives felt, what US veterans felt, what the community felt. It was a pure political stunt done by two governments. So, continuing that, there's a lot of war criminal memorials on Attu Island by the Japanese. I know that my ancestors don't like that. Having war criminals being being honored on our island. I know 2012, politicians put a memorial on our island without our input, without Attuans. It's always been like that, and I'm changing that. Our voices matter. And Tadaima's voices matter, and our voices matter. Sorry. So my cousin and I created a nonprofit to build us more of a voice, so we won't be left out on the table anymore, no matter who leaves us out. You're going to hear about it. That's all for me now. Oh, wait, no, I have one more excerpt from the book. So this is after the war. Do I have time? Okay. So this is another excerpt. This is after the war. So I read an excerpt before, and now this is after. So Mike Lucanen, and this is in Japan, Mike Lucanen and Alec Prosoff would talk to Japanese interrogators. Although all Aleuts were forced to learn Japanese, following instructions from one of the elders, they gave the Japanese false information about America and affirmed loyalty to their country. They criticized the Japanese government for ruining their Attu homes, imprisoning them, and taking their people to land where they do not talk his language. Alec Prosoff had arguments with the guards over their gods. One of them wanted to pray to their gods, but I told him I would pray to my own God. Optimism and happiness, their inner strengths, helped to bring them through. After the war, a teacher noticed these qualities in 5 of their children. They were good-natured children with a wonderful sense of humor. The Attuans constantly thought about returning home, and this too sustained them. But their loyalty cost them. The U.S. government did not allow them to return home. Just to give you an idea of the struggle, the Attuans traveled, since they were captive from the Japanese, 18,440 miles from Attu to Japan, then Japan to Alaska. And if you wanted, Kimiko, you can show that map again if you like. It shows that 18,440 miles that they had to travel. Yeah, and when they returned home, they were given a small, I believe they were given a small stipend, but they pretty much were left to themselves. They weren't allowed to go home. They were able to go to ACA or make your own choice. There were actually some orphans that were left in Seattle, and that's my cousin's story. So there were a few children orphanage in Seattle, and that's why they live there today. They were pretty much starved for 3 years, left on the side of the road to just try to give you perspective, to try to survive again with no family, no family, no food, no money. And my grandmother, Angeline, watched her first baby die, watched her husband die, watched her father die, and coming home to no support. So that is the story, as short as it can be.
Thank you, Helena. Appreciate you sharing the story and emotions with us. And it's okay to be emotional. You know, this is a very emotional topic. Could you do us a favor and hold up the front cover of the book? I believe it's Journal of an Aleutian Year by Ethel Ross Oliver. Yeah, so it's good that we know that. And Ethel Ross Oliver was a school teacher who moved out there, I think in 1946. And then the other book, When the Wind Was a River, really, really good resources for people to learn about the top. And I like that Ethel Ross Oliver took the time to get the statements directly from Mike Lucanen, and I think the other gentleman was Alex Prosoff. So because it was their words, and they wrote them as they recalled them.
If you do look for those books, they are off print, so they would have to look through libraries.
Thank you. And Helena, hopefully you can stick around so we can circle back. I think there's some questions for you. For right now, I wanted to to circle back with a couple questions to Dr. Holly Guise. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like for you, perhaps emotionally, as you and your mom traveled out to Unalaska? And then can you give us an update on the potential book that you might hopefully be publishing?
Those are great questions. Thank you, Dr. Livingston. The first time I flew out to Unalaska was, I think, in 2015 with my mother, and I was 5 months pregnant with my first one. So my mom insisted on traveling with me to make sure everything was safe, which is so cute of her and also very generous of her. And so we went out to Unalaska and we met with a few elders there. And there's something about physically being in a place, right? Like you can hear voices from elders about the place and about wartime atrocities, but also witnessing the place at a later date, right? And how there are changes, but then there are also not changes. Like you still see gunneries and other types of military debris around Unalaska. And as I'm sure exists, this wartime debris exists other parts of the Aleutians, right? Connecting with elders, it's really emotional, you know, and I realize this is a service by the elders to share these stories, right? Like I think that the elders should be given a lot of credit for coming forward with their stories, being willing to share these stories. I'm speaking as like an outsider, are not entitled to know the stories, right? Because some of these stories are stories about a darker history, a darker time, and of the stories that are shared, it's important to recognize the bravery in terms of coming forward and sharing stories about this time period. 10% of the population dying from diseases, from inadequate housing, lack of medical facilities, lack of clean water at these makeshift camps in Southeast Alaska. That's astronomical in terms of the number of cultural bearers who were elders who passed away during this time and the younger generation who were the babies. So we have entire generations that were stressed during this relocation. And so when I hear the stories from Larry and Alice and General Jake Lestenkoff, especially because they were young adults and they were children, there's something dark about listening to stories of incarceration from people who were children, right? Their entire home was taken away from them, right? And so you can't get that childhood back. You can heal, I think, as Alice said, by talking about it and forming a community and moving forward. But in terms of that childhood, it was taken away from them by this government relocation.
Thank you, Holly. I'd like to circle back around to Rachel. Do you have future projects on the horizon that might deal with the lost villages or anything having to do with the Unangax people in terms of honoring, recognizing what happened with them?
I don't have any specific project in mind, but I will continue to work on documenting and sharing that history. In fact, Okalina Patricia gave me an idea with talking about the dream wall by the church. That might be a project that, because the National Historic Area is centered there in Unalaska, that might be a great project for that program.
Thank you, Rachel. And then I'd like Kimiko to put up a question from the audience, and maybe Helena can address this one. It's the very first audience question, Kimiko. How would the Unangax like to see the Japanese, Russian, and U.S. government held accountable for those war crimes and crimes on humanity?
That is a very complicated question. So what's interesting is, as many of you know, the Japanese government hides the World War II history, and it's kind of opposite of, it's just the culture thing. The Germans teach their children, like, this is what we did, this is what they did, and they put their war crimes in jail. However, the Japanese government is the opposite. They honor their war criminals, and they don't teach people what happened during World War II. I actually lived in Australia for a while, and there was a huge museum about World War II, and the Japanese that would visit would be bawling. They would be crying because they've never heard about World War II before. And you can't hold, it's hard. You can't, it's just very culturally different and very hard to hold people accountable, especially governments. Feels like the world's against you. With the Russians, as you know, is a communist country. That's a whole, so each one has its very intricate political systems, and I hope that they are held accountable. The U.S. government did make an apology to the directly for the ones that were evacuated. Specifically for Attuans, I will reach out to each one, and hopefully they each will apologize. It'll be a race to heal a group of people that deserve to be healed. So I don't really have an exact answer for that question. I don't know if you want to add anything, Dr. Michael Livingston.
Thank you, Helena. They are difficult questions, and there's no easy answers. But backing up to a second, what Dr. Rachel Mason mentioned, she mentioned Patty's name, and that reminded me that from the previous panel, Patty Okolina, Patricia Lakanoff Gregory asked me to honor one person in our region who's done a lot of help with genealogy and family tree research, and that's Marty Murray, formerly of Unalaska, but now working in Kodiak, and just wanted to thank Marty. And then there's another question that maybe Kimiko can put up from Martin Steppeton. Dr. Holly, when you speak about this history abroad, what kind of reactions do you get from people who don't know about this history?
So that's a great question. Thank you for that question, Martin. So in teaching at the University of New Mexico last year and this year, I'm teaching. UNM is a primarily minority serving institution. And so a lot of the students in my class are Hispanic and also Native American. So when I talk about Unanga internment, there's an interesting parallel that students in my class come up with Bosque Redondo and the Navajo Long Walk, where Kit Carson forcibly removed the Navajo from their homelands, basically to a camp, right? And so we have parallel stories in U.S. history during what would be called the U.S. Indian Wars, right, in the American West. And so a lot of my students make these connections between wartime relocation stories of Native American people and this relocation story during wartime Alaska. And the thing that students are also surprised by is the component of forced labor, right? So that the US government had a partnership with the Folk Fur Company, a private corporation, to profit off of Unanga labor in a wartime zone, right? They're usually very surprised by that.
Thank you, Holly. And if I remember Alaska history correctly, when Alaska was sold from Russia to the United States in 1867, the price tag was $7.2 million. And from what I know of Alaska history, a lot of that money came from the Unanga people from the Pribilof Islands, those millions and millions of dollars of fur seal hides. So thank you for that. Let me look over the questions from the audience. Maybe Kimiko can put up the next question about the Hokkaido Ainu. While Hokkaido Ainu have their land-based displaced Sakhalin and Kurile Ainu are not allowed to return home still. I am crying with you. As Ainu, we know this historical trauma and deep emotion. And if I remember the history correctly, maybe Rachel might know a little bit more about this than I do, but from what I remember, in the 1700s, the Russians moved Una people from the Aleutian Islands over to the Kurile Islands. And what happened to those people, who know? But I think an archaeology team went over and archaeologically excavated those islands. Maybe you can share a little bit with us.
I don't know the results of that research, but I think there are some prehistoric connections between the Ainu and the Unangax people. And just one little tidbit of trivia: while the Attu were held prisoner in Hokkaido, a linguist from the University of Hokkaido recorded the Attuans speaking, and he was an expert on Ainu language, and he wanted to find connections between them. And so that there are definitely some connections.
And I really appreciate that comment. Just knowing that someone else has the same heart feeling, is helpful. It gives me strength. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, Helena, and thank you, Rachel. I think one really good thing that can come out of us working with Tadaima 2021 is to realize that we share similar histories, and that from that alliances can be built. Like I think it was Martin Steppeton in the previous panel mentioned, so that some of this stuff doesn't repeat itself, so that these bad things don't happen again. So I think it's important to form alliances. And then, Kimiko, is there another question that can be put up? Helena from Martin Steppeton, can you talk about some of your immediate goals with us and how people can donate to your efforts to help in some way? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steppeton. I appreciate that question so much. So I built this nonprofit to help create trips for Attuans to go back to Attu. Right now, it offers support for other interests, and we are trying to return stolen remains of our people from different locations, but mainly from the Smithsonian Institute. So that is our second goal. You can always, so I just started a webpage. Is attuforever.org, but it's pronounced in English atuxforever.org. You can donate $5, how many ever amount you want to donate. I would really appreciate it. We are just up and running. So as you know, that's very difficult. There's a little link there. You can add your email. So eventually we'll get newsletters going out for our progress.
Thank you, Helena. I know at APIA, we feel really bad for the Attuans, taken prisoner of war to Japan, put it mildly, not treated well there, brought back to the United States, not ever being allowed to return to their village. And I know at the Cultural Heritage Department at APIA, we acknowledge the terrible things that have happened to the Attuans and want to do anything we can to help out. And then, Kimiko, I think there's a comment from a person. These stories are dark. I appreciate you sharing them so much. We are not entitled to these stories, but I do not feel as alone. I appreciate you sharing. And Dr. Holly Guise, can you maybe speak for a moment about some of your future projects in terms of helping to get these stories out? And don't mean to put you on the spot, but if I understand correctly, you might be working on a book to publish about these oral stories.
Yes, that's correct. So I have the website, and the website is meant to be like a public-facing kind of platform, a digital humanities source with the edited videos, kind of like the video we saw earlier today, and with like a little biography of each elder for the interviews. And then the book I'm working on is a synthesis of Alaska Native history during World War II. So everything from Unanga internment to the Alaska Territorial Guard, to Native servicemen who encountered forms of discrimination even while serving in the U.S. Armed Forces, and even stories about violence against Native women with the influx of military personnel in Alaska. So I'm also looking at alliances between Alaska Natives during this time period, because I think, like you said, Dr. Livingston earlier, these alliances are so important, right? So I'm looking at alliances between Native people and also what this whole Alaska Native history would look like.
Thank you, Dr. Guise. And other people that have maybe shared similar experiences are the Jewish people during World War II. And to me, it's really interesting to look what they've done in terms of forming an anti-defamation league, so that whenever any group tries to say terrible things about the Jewish people, they actively say, no, that's not the right thing to do. And it would be awesome to see more indigenous groups in North America take on similar approaches, to where there's plenty of hate literature out there against all people. And I think it's right to stand up and say that's not right, and you need to stop that. The hate literature ends up with violence against people, whether those people are indigenous people or Jewish people or Japanese people. So let me look over the chat real quick and see if there's anything to put up. And Julie, can we put up Julie's comment? Are Alaskans learning this history in public schools? So let me turn the question over to Dr. Rachel Mason. And the question again is, are Alaskans learning this history in public schools, whether it's elementary schools, middle schools, or high schools or colleges?
Well, I think I'd actually like to turn that back to Helena, because I see that she answered the question and she's on the Native Advisory Committee for the school district. So she's in a better position than I am.
Yeah, no, Anchorage is the largest school district, I think, in the U.S. Correct me if I'm wrong. There's just so many schools here. My son had gone to the Heritage Center to learn about the culture, but as far as details on the war and World War II in Alaska, that's questionable. I doubt that it is as much as it should be. There might be a few schools here and there that teach it, but I can't speak for each school. But I hope to change that. As kind of the national thing, what is that national thing of race theory? It's a struggle for everybody, for the history to be taught. I would like my child to learn about the Japanese internment camps. We don't learn about that here. So
Thank you, Helena. Yeah, hopefully progress can be made to, as people like Dr. Mason and Dr. Guise publish more, and as Helena gets the story out more to more people and it shares it, hopefully it can be shared more and more. But from the panel, anybody else want to circle around? Let's see if I can remember the format we started in. Dr. Rachel Mason, anything else you'd like to finish up with?
Well, it's just been a great honor to participate with the panel and to be part of the Tadaima this year. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. Dr. Holly Guise, anything else to finish up, wrap up?
Just thank you for moderating. Thank you for having me. I appreciate this partnership with Tadaima and APIA and NPS and and also Apex Forever.
Thank you. Helena?
yes, if there's anybody listening that could be a partner, I know Tadaima, I can tell, will be a partner for my organization for many years to come. But if there's any other organizations that are listening and like to partner with me, just shoot me an email. It's on our webpage. I'd really like to build that foundation with partnerships. And also yesterday I learned when working with social justice, I learned about these refugees were stuck and they were taken away from their land. I think it was Cambodia, but he was saying a Buddhist monk came out and said, hatred never ceases hatred. So when you, Tadaima, or anybody else seek social justice, we can't go with hatred. We have to go with love. And that's my message to you.
Thank you, Helena. Wise words, very wise words. I had something I was going to say. Let's see if I can remember. What I wanted to say is that one role model that we can all use is Tadaima 2021 and Remembrance Day. Every year, the Japanese have Remembrance Day, and it's in January or February. And hopefully they'll invite us to that event. And then I think they're going to have another event in January, February about the order. Let's see if I can remember it's not 1066. maybe Julie or Kamiko can come back on and give us a little information about the upcoming events.
Oh, you're muted, Julie. You're muted.
Muted and frozen.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I have tears too. And I just want to thank you all for this incredible panel. I learned so much. And I look forward to continue learning. And thank you, Mike. You were talking about February 19th, the commemoration of Executive Order 9066. And yes, we will definitely love to partner with all of you. And so let's have a meeting after this moving forward. Thank you so much. Thank you, Kimiko, for having Tadaima.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Kamiko. And we look forward to continuing alliance building with you. Special thanks to Dr. Rachel Mason, Dr. Holly Guise, and Helena Schmitz for your awesome presentations today and your word of wisdom. Look forward to working with all of you in the future. So, Kagasakung, thank you. And Kukurugali, bye-bye.